A husband saw pictures of his unfaithful wife cheating on the internet and decided to get back at her like an alpha male. This morning felt like any other workday over the past year. I was poised at the breakfast table, coffee in hand, perusing the morning paper while Nancy finished dressing the bedroom. My attention was caught by a prominent headline. The article detailed a grim discovery: a man found brutally murdered in his own garage. Dallas Williams, an associate of the Galbraith agency where Nancy also worked, had met a tragic end, assaulted, and then strangled. With no suspects identified yet, the authorities had just initiated their investigation. Further reading seemed unnecessary. Folding the paper, I left it on the table, Nancy's usual spot. A sense of warmth enveloped me as I reflected on the events of the morning, savoring my coffee. Nancy entered the breakfast area, her beauty striking as ever. My wife of 6 years appeared even more radiant today than when we first met. There were no exchanged pleasantries as she poured herself coffee, a reminder of how our marriage had deteriorated in the past year. Our eyes briefly met, and I offered a faint smile in acknowledgement. She remained silent. This silence mirrored the pattern of the past 3 months, following a heated argument about her increasing work commitments. Nancy seemed to retreat into herself, displaying a chilliness that starkly contrasted with the warmth of our courtship days. I longed for that closeness dearly, now realizing it might be slipping away for good. Nancy grasped the paper in one hand, her coffee cup in the other. Her gaze skimmed the headlines, and suddenly she sputtered her coffee out. Her eyes fixed on the article detailing Dallas Williams' homicide. "Oh God, no," she cried out, looking as though she might vomit, and hurried to the bathroom. I remained seated in silence, understanding there was nothing I could say to her on the matter. Taking a deep breath, I rose, deposited my coffee cup in the dishwasher, and seized my briefcase. Exiting to the garage, I slipped into my car, dismissing any concern for Nancy's well-being. Her state of mind no longer held significance for me. Now, allow me to introduce myself. I am Rain Diaz, 30 years of age, hailing from Sicilian heritage in the Italian enclave of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My youth largely comprised mischief with a group of fellow Italian boys, self-proclaimed as the Junior Mafia. I'll gloss over most of our escapades and focus on the pivotal event that altered my trajectory. Larry Ross and I were as close as brothers, sharing the same age and circle of friends. The primary disparity between Larry and me lay in intellect. I won't suggest Larry lacked intelligence or the like. It's just that he seemed magnetically drawn to trouble with the law. Despite our joint ventures, he inevitably found himself ensnared by the authorities. One evening, Larry and I attempted to pilfer goods from a warehouse near the docks, hoping for a quick profit. However, the security guards had evidently spotted our entry through a side window, intercepting us as we sought to abscond with several boxes of cell phones. As one guard apprehended Larry, I swiftly reacted, thrusting a box into the face of another guard. With a forceful blow to the side of his head, I leaped onto his back, using all my strength. As he released Larry, I brought him to the ground, urging him to flee. Larry bolted, leaving me behind. The second guard regained his composure and seized me from behind. There wasn't much resistance after that. The guards roughed me up until the police arrived. Upon their arrival, they shared laughs with the guards while examining my bruised and bloody body. I was escorted to the police station and detained until my parents arrived to secure my release. To sum it up, I remained silent about my accomplice in the warehouse heist. I received a 2-week jail sentence and probation. Larry reached out multiple times to apologize for leaving me behind, but I reassured him it was okay. Given his prior record, he could have faced a much harsher punishment. He vowed to make it up to me, regardless of the time it took. My parents were livid and embarrassed by my arrest. My father disciplined me with his leather belt until I was nearly bleeding. Subsequently, they decided to enroll me in St. Peter's Catholic High School to straighten me out. Needless to say, the nuns and the priest did an admirable job of disciplining me by the time I reached my senior year. I had transformed my lifestyle. A mentor priest encouraged me to pursue a different path, leading me to sever ties with the neighborhood gang. Eventually, I performed well enough to gain acceptance to Penn State. To summarize, my college years were successful, culminating in a degree in human resources and securing a position with a respected company. For once, my parents felt genuine pride in my accomplishments. Throughout college, I casually dated several women, avoiding any serious commitments. It wasn't until 3.5 years post-graduation that I encountered Nancy Collins, a woman who challenged my bachelor lifestyle. Our paths crossed at a seminar for HR professionals, where I obtained her phone number, sparking her evident pleasure. Nancy stood out from my previous dating experiences with her complex personality, albeit marred by stubbornness. Once she formed an opinion, she remained steadfast, regardless of persuasion attempts, a trait I found challenging at times. Our courtship fluctuated between intimacy and distance, devoid of physical intimacy. Within the initial year of our relationship, I discovered Nancy's tumultuous upbringing. Abandoned as an infant, she endured a childhood shuttle between orphanages and foster homes after her mother left her in a church pew and vanished from her life. I firmly believe that Nancy's early deprivation of maternal love and care significantly influenced her struggles with personality. Despite these challenges, during the early years of our relationship, Nancy remained the most affectionate and warm-hearted person I had ever known. However, my parents didn't share my enthusiasm for our relationship. Throughout our courtship, they warned me against becoming too involved with her, but I chose to ignore their advice. Nancy and I exchanged vows in a modest ceremony at our local church. We both agreed to postpone starting a family until we achieved financial stability and Nancy could transition into full-time motherhood, an arrangement my parents disapproved of. Trouble surfaced in our marriage during the third year when Nancy's company was acquired by a larger corporation, resulting in her losing her job. Coping with this loss, she grappled with depression, despite our financial security. It took several months for Nancy to secure a new job, one she wasn't particularly enthusiastic about, an office manager position at the Galbraith agency. I endeavored to support Nancy during her unemployment, but I sometimes sensed resentment from her, particularly as I continued in my fulfilling job while she settled for less. Her mood swings, especially during her monthly cycle, added strain to our relationship. After settling into her role at Gal, Nancy gradually resumed her usual pleasant demeanor. Our situation improved overall, including our intimate life, which had suffered during her period of unemployment. There were moments in our bedroom where I felt Nancy was trying hard to compensate for the rough patch by being more assertive in our lovemaking. For about 10 months, I didn't voice any complaints, and our marriage flourished. Nancy grew more enthusiastic about her job and even pursued a home study course in real estate. I was delighted to witness her transformation into the loving wife she had always been to me. However, amidst both challenging and promising circumstances, came a mix of good and bad news. The good news was my steady advancement up the management ladder at my company, promising a bright future after 6 years with them. Yet, a merger with an Atlanta-based company brought significant changes to my job responsibilities. I was tasked with integrating the Atlanta company into our corporate structure, including training their personnel and implementing necessary staff reductions. While I was excited about the new challenges, there was a downside. I would need to travel more frequently and for longer periods away from home. Nancy wasn't pleased with the prospect of my increased time on the road, despite my efforts to be home for weekends during longer trips. Initially, Nancy's frustration over my frequent absences appeared to be alleviated, but as often happens, complications arose gradually. Despite my return home on weekends, it wasn't enough to make up for the extended periods I spent away. Nancy became entrenched in a stubborn mindset, accusing me of enjoying my time away and even suggesting the possibility of infidelity in Atlanta. Despite my efforts, such as calling her during the day and sending flowers and humorous cards, her aloofness persisted. It took nearly 6 months to complete the staff training in Atlanta, marking the end of my travels. Additionally, I received a promotion at corporate headquarters, hoping these changes would improve Nancy's perception of me. However, it seemed I was mistaken. Once I stopped traveling, Nancy intensified her workload at the agency. When I inquired about it, she sarcastically remarked that it was her turn to work for promotion and implied it was time for me to experience solitude in the evenings. Our closeness suffered further 2 weeks ago when Nancy informed me that she and her colleagues would be away for the weekend, attending a developer session for high-rise condominiums near the riverfront. She considered it essential for her career advancement, without consulting me about her absence or leaving any room for discussion. Although I had distanced myself from the junior Mafia since high school, I maintained close relationships with some of my best friends, especially Larry. I reached out to him and suggested catching the Steelers versus Raiders game on Sunday. Without hesitation, he agreed, knowing how to secure the best tickets for Steelers games. I brought up Nancy's upcoming business trip, prompting Larry to suggest spending the weekend with him and the guys to catch up on neighborhood gossip. The thought of a weekend getaway sounded appealing, so I decided not to inform Nancy of my plans. Friday morning, amidst the chilly atmosphere, I casually asked Nancy about reaching her during her trip over breakfast. She dismissively brushed off the notion, stating she'd be with influential people and preferred not to be disturbed. It felt as though she viewed me more as a nagging parent than husband, but I let it slide. Later that day, Nancy departed for Atlantic City, where I met up with Larry for a long-awaited reunion. It had been over a year since our last hangout. Being one of the few who managed to leave our old neighborhood without getting entangled with the law, I felt a sense of nostalgia mingled with gratitude. During our reunion, Larry mentioned a debt he owed me, promising his assistance whenever I needed it. On Saturday night, we ventured to the Sweet Cat Lounge on the southeast side, a strip club. The place was bustling with scantily clad dancers, reminiscent of scenes from the show. A young woman, barely older than 19, approached and danced provocatively in front of me. Larry hinted that she was available for the night, subtly suggesting she could be mine if I desired. Amidst this, he engaged in inappropriate physical contact. In response, I reaffirmed my commitment to my marital vows, acknowledging the temptation, but emphasizing the significance of loyalty and fidelity in my values. I turned down the advances of the enticing stripper, and she shifted her attention to another eager customer. Larry, expressing disbelief, remarked on my apparent seriousness about fidelity. I affirmed my stance, emphasizing that without fidelity, there could be no love, no marriage. The following morning brought the typical cold, windy weather of Pittsburgh. However, this didn't deter the throngs of fans making their way to Three Rivers Stadium for the Steelers versus Raiders game. The bitter rivalry between these two football teams resembled gang warfare. Since the Steelers clinched an unforgettable victory in one of the NFL's most memorable moments, with Franco Harris making an unlikely reception that changed the outcome of a defensive struggle against the Oakland Raiders in the first ever playoff game at Three Rivers Stadium, neither team had forgotten that legacy. Thankfully, weapons weren't permitted on the field. The Steelers weren't having the best season, with a record of 5 wins and 5 losses at this point. Nonetheless, today marked the biggest game of the season, with the silver and black back in town. It was a raucous afternoon on the football field. My voice grew hoarse from all the shouting and screaming. But in the end, the final score was Steelers 22, Raiders 21. It felt like a perfect ending to the day. Despite Larry's invitation to celebrate, I had to decline and told him maybe another time. Tomorrow promised to be a tough day at the office, and I knew I didn't need a hangover on top of all the other job pressures. This evening, I eagerly awaited Nancy's return home, but she didn't arrive. Sunday night passed with her absence, leaving me with uneasy thoughts about the state of our marriage as I headed to work on Monday morning. A sense of impending doom lingered whenever I dwelled on our relationship. While rough patches were common in marriages, I couldn't shake the feeling that ours had deteriorated beyond that point. The workday unfolded with its usual chaos, filled with high-level meetings and the looming threat of a lawsuit against the company. It wasn't until 6:15 that I finally had a moment to sit down and check my emails. Amongst the dozen messages from staff and updates on the lawsuit, there was one titled, "Who was the last one to know?" Opening it, I anticipated a humorous animated cartoon, but what I found inside was something unexpected. Suddenly, I was confronted with a photo of Nancy and another man locked in a passionate embrace, their lips pressed together. At the bottom of the image, a text message dared, "Want to know what happened after this? Click on the next link." A cold chill ran down my spine as I hesitated, staring at the betrayal captured in the photo before me. With trembling hands, I clicked on the next link, and another image flashed on screen. This time, Nancy and the man were both unclothed, standing together in a motel room. Once again, the taunting message at the bottom dared me to see more. My throat tightened, and a heavy weight settled in my chest as the image of my wife burned itself into my mind. Despite the part of me that resisted, I knew I had to click on the link, and there it was, the final blow to my marriage. Nancy, on all fours on the bed with the same man from the previous photos, her face contorted in lust and ecstasy. The woman I had loved with my whole heart had betrayed me, tearing my trust and love apart. The text at the bottom of the photo provided the cruel sting. Prick, provided by Dallas Williams. My worst nightmare was thrust in my face. Nancy's recent coldness wasn't just the discontent of a wife with her husband. It was a chill, a sign of decay settling into our failing marriage. What ensued was anger and rage, but for me, it was a calm resolve. A feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. Revenge seeped into my thoughts. Infidelity and betrayal would not go unanswered in my lifetime. 2 people would pay dearly for their insults. My initial focus was on the sender of the incriminating emails. There was no name, no indication of the sender's identity. Questions raced through my mind. Why send this email? What did they hope to achieve by exposing my wife's infidelity? Were they friends or foes of Nancy? These questions would need addressing later. I inserted a CD into my computer, copying the email into 3 photos, then promptly deleted it. A scrubber program erased all evidence from my hard drive. As I sat back in my swivel chair, grappling with Nancy's betrayal, I could only attribute it to her multiple personalities. Yet, if she wanted a divorce, I would have granted it, and we could have walked away from this marriage wreck. But now, my revenge would be swift and absolute. I would show no mercy to either of them. The plan began to take shape in my mind as I left the office. I found a payphone nearby and dialed an untraceable, pay-as-you-go cell phone, informing Larry that it was time for me to collect on the debt he owed me. Upon arriving home around 8:10, I discovered Nancy already there, watching TV. She didn't rush to greet me, but rather commented on my late arrival, to which I pointed out her own tardiness. As we stood in the kitchen, a heavy silence lingered between us. I grabbed a beer and retreated to my office, ensuring to lock the door. In the realm of justice, a person convicted of a capital crime typically receives one of 2 sentences: the death penalty or life imprisonment. My revenge plan involved 1 death sentence and 1 life sentence. I needed some solitary time to finalize my scheme. Larry would handle Mr. Dallas Williams, while I would personally settle the score with Nancy, making the revenge appear as a simple case of a wife leaving her husband. I arranged for flowers to be sent to Nancy's office and made dinner reservations near her workplace, leaving messages for her to meet me. She never showed up, and I instructed the maitre d' to give our table to someone else, ensuring he would remember my wife standing me up. When Nancy returned home that evening without offering any explanation for missing our dinner reservation, I had no interest in hearing any excuses. The die had been cast, and the wheels of revenge were set in motion. The following day, a courier arrived at my office with an envelope marked "Personal and Confidential." Inside was a single sheet of paper with bold instructions to destroy it. After reading the first sentence, which advised me to secure an airtight alibi for the upcoming night, I moved on to the second sentence, which provided a name, Rob Castagneau, and a phone number. I read and reread the phone number until I had it memorized. The paper was swiftly shredded, and I discreetly disposed of the shredded pieces in various trash cans outside the office building. That evening, I arrived home ahead of Nancy, changed into comfortable clothes, poured myself a tall glass of Jim Beam, and settled down to the soothing tunes of smooth jazz. The television remained off. It was to be my night ruling over my own domain. Nancy would have to find her own entertainment. There would be no confrontation. Upon her return, Nancy quickly surveyed the scene, then turned and walked out the door again. I paid no mind to her destination, whether it was for dinner or to meet Dallas Williams. Time was running out for both of them. By the time Nancy slipped quietly into bed beside me, I was already drifting off to sleep, the silence of the room ringing louder than any noise. Thursday evenings typically meant poker night with the guys from work, held in the back room of the old Stagecoach bar. This served as my airtight alibi for the remainder of the evening. I was the one returning home in the early hours of the morning, slipping into bed quietly. The clock on my nightstand displayed 3:15 as I pulled the covers over me, Nancy remaining silent and motionless beside me. Despite the events of the evening, falling asleep proved surprisingly easy. With Dallas Williams having faced his penalty, it was now time to deliver justice to the second perpetrator. Immediate action wasn't necessary for the life imprisonment penalty. Nancy's punishment would begin after a simple phone call, bringing a sense of satisfaction and closure. Whatever inner demons or twisted rationale led her to disrespect me so blatantly was a matter for someone else to discern. I no longer harbored any compassion for the woman I once loved with all my heart and soul. Her impending retribution was of her own making. The police began their inquiries, interviewing every member of the Galbraith agency staff, gathering intriguing yet inconsistent statements. Nancy herself faced multiple police interviews. Detective Emerson Simmons questioned me about Dallas Williams, probing for any hint of a more than professional relationship between Dallas and Nancy. I staunchly affirmed my unwavering trust in my wife's fidelity. His smile, tinged with what seemed like pity for a betrayed man, only reinforced my resolve. The funeral service for Dallas Williams took place that Tuesday morning. I watched Nancy don her somber black dress, the same one she had worn to my mother's funeral. She didn't invite me to accompany her to Dallas's funeral, and whatever thoughts she harbored regarding his passing, she kept to herself. Without a doubt, Nancy had much to contemplate in the wake of the homicide and her own infidelity during the following week. She seemed eager to engage in a serious discussion about our relationship, but my cold demeanor swiftly put an end to her efforts. Reconciliation or making amends were beyond consideration for me. I held the power to put an end to the charade. 4 weeks after Dallas's homicide, police investigations seemed to lose momentum, with no new leads emerging and suggestions that Dallas might have been targeted by a loan shark or a bookie. Throughout this period, Nancy's mental state continued to deteriorate, marked by increased absent-mindedness and confusion. Little things frightened her, yet I offered no assistance or solace, even as I witnessed her struggle. I thought to myself, too bad, as I observed her slowly unravel. Finally, on the subsequent Thursday, I made the call to Rob. The plan was already in motion, and he was eager to carry it out. Nancy had only hours left before her new life would begin. On Friday morning, I left for work before Nancy was even dressed, deliberately avoiding a final encounter in our house. Across the street from our home, a car with 2 men lay in wait. The kidnapping unfolded at a 4-way stop sign intersection, with vehicles in front and behind. Nancy's car became a blockade, thwarting any chance of escape. With the precision of a Delta Force team, 2 men sprang into action. The driver's door was swiftly opened as a needle punctured Nancy's arm, while her seatbelt was deftly cut away. She was forcefully pushed into the passenger seat as one of the men assumed the driver's position. In a matter of seconds, the 3 vehicles sped away, the entire abduction process taking less than 40 seconds. At 11:30 that morning, in a branch bank on the east side of town, a woman resembling Nancy entered. With meticulous resemblance, she handed a withdrawal slip requesting $27,500 from our joint account to the teller. Presenting a driver's license and passport as proof of identity, she patiently awaited the issuance of a cashier's check, which took only a few minutes. An observant guard escorted the woman to her car, taking note of the license plate as she drove off. The line at the American Airlines ticket counter was brief as the Nancy lookalike approached, presenting her photo ID and passport to receive her boarding pass. Flight reservations had been made online the previous night. Her journey began with a flight to JFK Airport, followed by a non-stop flight on Flight 873 to Rio de Janeiro. The Pittsburgh departure was scheduled for 3:27 in the afternoon, with a flight reaching JFK, New York, later that evening. From there, the American Airlines plane embarked on an overnight journey to Mexico, carrying the passenger Nancy Dias. I waited until noon on Saturday before contacting the police to report Nancy as missing. To my surprise, Detective Lawrence Fosto was the officer who arrived at the house to take the report. I informed him that Nancy had returned home at her usual time, but attempts to reach her on her cell phone were futile, showing a non-service notification. When I reached out to Rachel Mitchell, one of Nancy's close friends at Galbraith, she revealed that Nancy had not shown up for work the previous day and hadn't even called in to report her absence. Detective Foster made cryptic notes in his notepad, occasionally glancing up at me as he began probing into the state of my marriage and any potential problems that might be related to Nancy's disappearance. I reiterated what I had previously told him. After Dallas Williams' homicide investigation, our marriage was fine. and I couldn't fathom any reason for Nancy to voluntarily vanish. He then probed if I had any involvement in Nancy's disappearance, to which I vehemently declared my love for my wife and my incapacity to harm her. Lying to the police was a skill I had honed early in life, associating with the junior mafia, and it continued to serve me well. 4 days later, Detective Foster visited my office during business hours, presumably to size up the husband he was dealing with. Once in my office, he took a seat and offered a tight-lipped smile, while I wore the expression of a distressed husband. I questioned him about any developments regarding Nancy's whereabouts. He responded, providing a mix of positive and negative aspects. According to Detective Foster, several witnesses claimed to have seen Nancy having coffee at Benny's restaurant on Bennett Street around 10:20 on Friday morning. Later, she appeared at the Allegan National Bank around 11:30 as captured on video surveillance. There she made a $27,500 withdrawal from our joint savings account. Expressing disbelief, I questioned how this could be possible, as Nancy hadn't mentioned anything about wanting to withdraw money. Detective Foster assured me that the evidence was clear, explaining that the cashier had made photocopies of Nancy's driver's license and passport before issuing the cashier's check. I watched the surveillance tape, confirming the person at the cashier's window as my wife, Nancy. Once again, Detective Foster paused, observing my reaction to his revelation. I expressed to the detective that there must be some mistake, emphasizing that Nancy and I discussed everything happening in our marriage. Maintaining a bewildered look, I met the gaze of the police detective, knowing he was withholding the most devastating news for last, and I had to brace myself for another acting performance. The detective proceeded to share the most disturbing news, revealing that my wife had purchased airline tickets to New York and then to Rio de Janeiro. He mentioned that they located her car in the long-term parking lot of the airport, disclosing that her flight left Pittsburgh on Friday afternoon at 5:17, followed by her departure to Rio from New York. At 9:45, the detective informed me that they had contacted the Rio de Janeiro police to locate Nancy, but she seemed to have vanished once she arrived in Rio. Detective Foster now fixed his gaze intently on me, waiting my response. I exclaimed that it was madness and stated firmly that Nancy would never do something like that. I emphasized my belief in her love for me and mine for her, expressing that leaving the country was absurd. Attempting to portray the betrayed husband, I began to cry right in front of the detective. A heavy silence filled my office before the detective resumed talking. He asked if I believed this had any connection to the homicide of Dallas Williams. In response, I questioned how he could even ask that, asserting that my wife had no involvement in the homicide. I reminded him that she was interviewed and never charged in connection with that case. Detective Foster clarified that while they never charged my wife, she was high on their suspect list. In response to the detective's statement about others, suggesting my wife and Mr. Williams were romantically involved, I expressed disbelief. I asserted that it was absurd to accuse her of being linked to the Williams homicide, emphasizing that more than office gossip was needed to support such a claim. My eyes bore into his as I spoke. I challenged the credibility of the accusations leveled against my wife. The detective explained that they were still investigating, and with my wife now out of the country, suspicions about her role in the homicide had intensified. He paused, sharing that evidence at the crime scene pointed to a carnal motive, with Williams having been tortured and beaten for hours before being strangled. In response, I emitted a small laugh, scoffing at the idea that my petite wife could have committed such a crime. I questioned the detective's belief in her capability, remarking that she could barely open a pickle jar, let alone strangle someone. Frustrated by the escalating and seemingly baseless accusations, I addressed Detective Foster, acknowledging that all the evidence thus far pointed to my wife's involvement, but questioning the validity of their conclusions. Detective Foster suggested that my wife may have had assistance, and I was surprised when he hinted at the possibility of my involvement. Before he could say more, he assured me that I had a solid alibi for the time of the homicide. However, his tone lacked conviction. Summarizing the situation, I expressed disbelief at their theory that my wife had fled the country due to her involvement in a homicide, and that I was somehow implicated in assisting her. Pausing to glare directly at him, I awaited his response. Seeking clarification, I questioned whether I accurately summarized Detective Foster's statements. He sat there, assessing my indignation, perhaps detecting a hint of scorn in my voice. With a firm tone, I informed the detective that if there was nothing else, our meeting was over. Rising from my desk, I approached the closed door, opening it to signal his departure. Detective Foster got up slowly, acknowledging my statement with a curt, "Thank you for your time, Mr. Diaz. I'll keep you informed about your wife's disappearance." There was no handshake exchanged, and I made no gesture to offer mine. After he left, I closed the door and settled back into my swivel chair, reflecting on the purpose behind Detective Foster's visit. It was evident that his aim was to extract more information than to provide substantial details about the two cases. Carefully pondering each statement and question, I realized he harbored suspicions about my involvement, yet my alibis remained solid. I was playing poker on the night Dallas Williams was executed, and I had been in meetings all day on the Friday when Nancy went missing. 2 weeks had passed since Nancy's disappearance. I hadn't heard from Rob or Larry. Nancy's whereabouts and well-being remained unknown, and at times I felt as if I were being followed during my morning commutes and evening returns. However, my actions were meticulously planned, from work to home, with grocery shopping seamlessly integrated into my routine. Despite my efforts to maintain normalcy, the uncertainty weighed heavily on my mind. Every other day, I called Detective Foster for updates on my missing wife, but he had no new information to offer. The Mexican police found no evidence of Nancy after her arrival in Rio. Later that afternoon, I ordered a pizza from Domino's while watching college football on TV. The doorbell rang, and the pizza delivery guy arrived with my hot pizza. I paid him and offered a couple of bucks as a tip, maintaining the facade of a routine life amidst the chaos. Upon lifting the lid of the pizza box in the kitchen, I discovered an envelope resting on top. Carefully unfolding it, I extracted a sheet of paper bearing instructions for the following day. The note dictated that I should attire myself for church and attend the 9 o'clock Mass at St. Peter's. It went on to detail slipping out through the side door on the east during communion, where a dark Ford would be waiting. Understanding that this rendezvous would mark my final encounter with Nancy before Rob whisked her away from the country, I realized the significance of the plan. Rob had exercised patience, waiting 2 weeks to ensure everything fell into place seamlessly. The meticulously crafted COVID plan, with Nancy's supposed departure from the country, served as the primary piece of evidence for the police. It was a ploy devised by Rob to mislead the investigation, leaving the impression that Nancy was still alive when she boarded the plane bound for Rio. This elaborate scheme effectively prevented the police from building a circumstantial case against me, despite the absence of Nancy's body. As I lay in bed, engulfed in darkness, I reflected on the harrowing experiences of the past month and a half. From the moment I received that ominous email, it became abundantly clear that my ancestral lineage harbored a darker side of my personality, a facet that had been awakened amidst the chaos. Whenever I sensed disrespect from anyone, whether it stemmed from nature or nurture, I knew all too well where my darker inclinations originated. St. Peter's boasted a sprawling sanctuary, and the 9 o'clock Mass typically drew a sizable congregation of several hundred worshippers. Amidst the sea of parishioners, it was relatively simple to blend in and detect any potential surveillance. If the police had indeed been tailing me, they likely remained stationed outside the church. As the congregation converged towards the altar for communion, I seized the opportunity to discreetly slip out through the side door. Waiting on the bustling street was a Ford sedan, its engine humming with anticipation. Sliding into the back seat, I braced myself as the vehicle surged forward into traffic. The journey lasted approximately 15 minutes before the sedan came to a halt in front of a cavernous warehouse building. Without a backward glance, the driver gestured for me to enter through the side door of the building. Stepping inside, I found myself amidst the vast emptiness of the warehouse, with faint light filtering in through scattered windows. Making my way towards the rear, I spotted an office area illuminated by the soft glow of daylight. It was there that Rob emerged, marking our inaugural face-to-face encounter. Offering a cordial greeting, Rob extended his hand, which I shook firmly. His demeanor remained stoic as he cautioned me about Nancy's altered state, implying that encountering her might prove emotionally taxing. I stated that I was beyond concerning myself with her physical state or the trials she had endured since her abduction. Moving towards the open door, I paused and inquired about whether she was being medicated now. Rob responded in the negative, admitting that she probably wished she were. He asserted that he had kept her lucid and aware at all times, claiming that she was now a broken woman, meticulously groomed for her new life. Entering a brightly lit room, I found Nancy bound to a chair in the center. Circling her, I positioned myself directly in front, though she remained silent, her gaze distant. There was a noticeable absence of the spark and vigor in her eyes. Addressing her, I conveyed that for the remainder of her days, she would carry the burden of the misery she had brought upon herself. I recounted enduring her emotional volatility and distant demeanor, underscoring that her betrayal and the disdain she and her paramour had shown were unforgivable. I made it clear that she would spend her life atoning for her infidelity, noting that Dallas had already settled his debt with me. Speaking deliberately, I wanted her to grasp that it was I who had ensured justice for her and her lover. Despite having once loved her, I made it known that my sentiments toward her had turned to contempt. I assured her that Rob had promised she would be well looked after, receiving care akin to their finest horses and cattle. Pausing briefly, I noticed a tear forming in Nancy's eye. It was the only acknowledgement I received before turning and leaving. The Ford sedan returned me to Street Peters, where I entered just as the 11:15 Mass concluded. Afterward, I drove straight home, craving the numbing embrace of Jim Beam. It has been 2 years since I last laid eyes on Nancy, and she has almost faded entirely from my life. I sold the house we once shared after her disappearance, and Detective Foster's investigations have long since grown cold. I now spent more time with Larry at a Sweet Cat Lounge, indulging in the various pleasures it offers. Marriage is a concept I have discarded entirely. My 6 years with Nancy convinced me that women bring more trouble than they are worth. My parents, it seems, were right in cautioning me against my involvement with Nancy, a lesson learned too late, as many are. It was Rachel Mitchell who sent me the email, as it turns out. She was Dallas Williams's lover before he left her for Nancy. I never thanked her for the email, nor did I uncover how she obtained those incriminating photos of Dallas and Nancy. Perhaps, in her own way, she sought the same revenge I did. Friends, write your comment on this story. Have a nice day.
Moral of the story. The story serves as a dark, cautionary tale that betrayal can have catastrophic consequences, especially when you do not truly know the depths of the person you are crossing. It highlights that breaking trust can awaken dormant, destructive forces, and that for some, forgiveness is not an option, only absolute cold-blooded retribution.